Hi there. Over the past few weeks, I've been working a lot on creating ambient sound effects for my upcoming sound pack, which is going to be my fantasy ambient loops. If it's not out already, I'll make sure to put a link in the description below if it is. But I found myself as I was working to going back to the same similar plugins because they were just so effective at getting the results that I want and just being able to help me create really good and immersive environments. So with that said, let's get into our project here so I can show what those plugins are and how I use them. All right, so here we are inside of Reaper, and the first plugin that I used a lot was MRatioMB, and this was used to remove a lot of the noise out of the recording. So you can do this with other software, for example, inside of RX or just using other plugins, but I found that this was one of the easiest, if not the easiest one to use just to get really quick results and just being able to design very quickly. So let me just show you how I used it here. So I'll just play the ambience here that I have. Right, there you have it. It's basically my goal here was to make a magical forest environment with like birds and stuff like that. So that's what this is doing here. And you can see here, I'm using MB ratio on actually all of the layers I use for this ambience here. So when you are going out and recording your own environmental sounds, you can get a lot of noise in the recordings, especially if you don't have like top of the line, best professional quality equipment. And even then, depending on what you're recording and how you're recording and where you're recording, you can get a lot of noise seeping into the recording. So let me just show you here on one track here, what it's doing. So here's the first one. Right, so if I take off all of my effects here and I just put on MRatioMB, just have a listen to the noise portion. So you can see here I'm reducing the noise by quite a bit. So just have a listen to that. Right? It's a drastic change. It's a drastic difference. And it might not be what you want for different situations. But what I was using it for was to isolate specific birds and isolate specific insects. So in this instance, it was just birds. And with that, I was able to just isolate it really well, add a bunch of effects on there, and then you can get a pretty clean sound here. Right? And I did the same thing over here. Right, you can hear that it just brings down the wind noise right away. Now, if I just to give you an idea of how much it's actually making a difference to the track here, I'm going to remove it off of all 3 tracks, including the group bus here, and let's have a listen. Right, so a huge difference. So try it out. If you have noisy recordings that have a lot of wind noise or just noise in general, try it out, put it on there, reduce some noise, and see what kind of results you can get. All right, the next plugin that I found myself using a lot was a Reverb, and I was using this to kind of glue all my sounds together. So let's have a listen to one of the examples here that I have. This is like a cave or a cavern. So let's have a listen. Right, so I really want to pick an example here that was very obvious. So if I just solo just the reverb here, let's have a listen. Right, it's giving that sense of depth, that sense that you're in this massive space. And I was really using it for the water drops that I have here. Right, so all of the 4 layers here that I have are all going into this reverb here. And here I'm just using Stratus 3D. I'm using large live spaces. It doesn't really matter what you're using here. I just tried to find one that was with a big, large space that was giving this sense of this like massive environment. And that's it. So with that now, like if I take it off and we just have a listen to everything here, you'll see how it kind of really changes the sound here. right? Hopefully you can hear how it completely takes you out of the environment when you're taking off the reverb. And just as a note as well, like these reverbs, you don't have to use them just for, underground or cavernous kind of ambiances. You can really use it for like any kind of indoor environment to match the environment. Also, even outdoors, like for example, in a forest, I've used this. I've used reverb in a forest to make sounds feel like they're far away, and to kind of glue everything together. So don't think that it just has to be like an underground place or a closed off environment. No, you can use it for different things. Of course, you have to change the settings and tweak it a bit, but yeah, using a reverb is super useful for just placing the sounds in an environment and make them feel kind of cohesive and like they're just working together. All right, the last plugin that I used a lot for my ambience sound design work, this should come as no surprise to anyone, but it's basically an EQ, and this can be any EQ that you use, and I'll show you different ways that I used it. So let's have a listen to this environment here, this ambience, and then I'll show you how I used it. All right, so the first way that I used it here is for the, I think it was the crickets down here. So let's just have a solo this out and let's have a listen. And this is super useful because if I take it off, you'll notice that this recording is actually very noisy. Right, there's a lot happening in there, and really the only thing I wanted was to have those crickets in here. And you'll also hear here I have other crickets, and down here, if I'm not mistaken, I also have other crickets. And you'll see here I'm doing a similar thing, except for this one, instead of just having a really narrow band just to have a specific kind of cricket sound or insect sound, here I'm just putting a low pass. Again, if I take it off, you'll notice like there's a lot of noise that just doesn't need to be there. So I really just want the insect sounds above the certain threshold here. Right, so that's one way that I used it, is to just isolate certain sounds, certain frequencies where certain creatures might live. Right, so I really want to be able to isolate them so that I can fill out this frequency spectrum more, or just to clean it up as much as possible. All right, here I have another ambience that I created. This was supposed to be like this kind of cemetery environment ambience. So let's have a listen here. And let me show you here how I used some of the EQs that I use here. So another way that I've used EQ here is to really control certain frequencies that were really peaking out or were just too present. So if we solo this one here, you can see there's a resonant frequency here at around 121. If I take this off, it's not much, and it was probably just happening. It might have been happening a different part of the recording here, but this is one place where I had it. And if we look at this one here, I had another one here where I was bringing that down. Right, so just controlling those resonant frequencies is another way that I use the EQ. You can see I'm probably doing something similar over here. Yeah, here I'm actually just using it more to shape the sound of the that I wanted here. So if I take this off, you get a lot of that high end, which is fine. I wanted to get more of those mids out, and that really helped to bring it out here, this band. So again, so using it to control resonant frequencies, using it to bring out certain elements, certain parts of the sound, and then also to isolate certain parts of the frequency spectrum, for example, for the creatures and the insects and stuff like that. I also used it, for example, on creatures here that I have. I would use stuff like a filter here just to make sure that I don't have a lot of those harsh high frequencies. Right, because these can tend to like get really bright in a mix, especially when you have a dark ambience like a cemetery where you want it to feel a bit darker and more isolated and creepy or lonely. That's another way that I used it. It's just to put on a low pass filter. And just to show you here another kind of extreme example, here's another layer that I use in this other environment. Here I'm just actually just using 2 layers here. It sounds like this. If we solo this one and I show you the EQ here, I'm just going to remove it. right? You can see the drastic difference that it makes when you're recording your own ambient sounds. If you're going out and recording them, a lot of times you might have a lot of low end or low mid frequency information that is just not necessary for certain ambiences that you want to create. Sometimes you just need to completely cut that out. Again, same thing with the highs here. You don't need the kind of harsh highs or the insects that might be up here that might be kind of harsh. So you might want to put a shelf there or something like that to just control them. And yeah, so just using an EQ is a good way to completely change up a sound to make sure that it just fits in, and there's frequencies that are not overtaking the entire ambience that you're trying to create. All right, so I hope you found that useful and valuable, and just seeing the plugins that I've been using for this project, just to design a lot of different ambiences and how they can make a big and drastic difference in the sound files that you have. So, anyways, I hope you found that useful. If you have any comments, questions, leave it down below. If you want to check out the sound pack, if it's out, I'll make sure to leave it down below as well in the description. And I think that's it for now. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.